Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Daily Friends Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Dr. John Endres, who's just returned to us from some time traveling abroad. John, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. We have power, which is quite delightful.
Excellent. That's what a way to welcome you home to South Africa, to give you one of our rare, exquisite gifts that's only, it's carefully guarded, not handed out to just everyone all the time. And of course, we also have Mdluli here. Mdluli, how are you doing?
Hi, Nicholas. I'm good, and you?
I'm pretty good, pretty good. Yeah, glad it's Thursday, but otherwise I'm good. All right, so for our final episode of the week, let us get a little bit into the stories of what's going on. And the first is that the South African Communist Party is gearing up for its 15th national conference, which is going to be held sometime before August. And it has, although it's not entirely clear what they're going to discuss, they've already put forward some documents in the public sphere about what they're going to be talking about and what their priorities are for this conference. And as our colleague Dr. Anthea Jeffrey notes, it's important to pay attention to what the SACP says, because the SACP has a pretty big role in particularly the sort of intellectual policy side of the ANC. They continue to be, in many ways, the kind of policy engine of the ANC. They're not completely aligned in everything, but where the SAPC is going, CP, is going, you can pretty much expect the ANC to follow 99% of the time. Anyway, so what's on the agenda? There's two things, but I want to start with the first one. And I'll quote a bit here. According to the party's Central Committee, the new program, quote, remains grounded on the necessity to drive a second, more radical phase of the National Democratic Revolution, or NDR, as the most direct route to socialism. They also go on to say, against a backdrop of rising fury at the failures of the ANC government to keep the lights on, fix the potholes, run the trains, punish the perpetrators of last year's riots, or protect people from surging crime, the SACP is determined to produce concrete programs, campaigns, and policies that will reignite the hopes and confidence of our people in our movement. One of the key aims is to reinstate prescribed assets. So we haven't heard about prescribed assets for a while. We talk about it a lot on the show. And it was defeated for a time, but it appears the SACP is desperate to drag it screaming and kicking back into the light of South Africa's domestic policy discussion. So, John, let's just perhaps go over a little bit of prescribed assets. Why do you think the SACP is bringing this up again? What it is, what it should do? What are your thoughts on what's going on here?
Prescribed assets is it's a funny old idea that keeps returning like the undead. You keep thinking it's dead, and then it keeps making a comeback, and it's doing that once again now. And what prescribed assets really is the proposal that the government should pass a law forcing pension funds to invest a certain percentage of the funds they manage into assets that the government prescribes, where it tells the pension funds you have to put 2%, 5%, or 10%, whatever the number is, into things that we tell you to put the money into. And of course, in South Africa, we're very much aware that there are lots of gaping holes in the public finances, not least in the SOEs. And it's easy to imagine that the government would tell the pension funds, guys, Eskom's got 400 billion rand debt or more. We need to close that hole. So we need you to put some of your money into Eskom, or into SAA, or into Denel, or into the railways, PRASA, or Transnet, whatever the case might be. But the reason we are so critical of this idea is, firstly, that the funds that those pension funds are managing don't belong to the pension funds. That is saved money of people who are saving for their own pensions in the future. And it is the responsibility of the pension fund manager to manage those funds responsibly so that they generate a good return. The funds are not put at risk, so that one day when those savers go on pension, there will be money for them to retire on. And the idea of prescribed assets goes against that. The government will say, look, you maybe have to invest in PRASA or SAA or ESCOM, but we'll guarantee that you'll have a good return out of it. I think those promises should be met with a great deal of skepticism, and we should push back very hard against that. It is also a property rights issue, and these are some dots that we like to join because we think those are really important dots. Where property rights aren't secured, economies can't grow, people can't grow their wealth, they can't save, they can't make provision for the future. And so we're always very insistent that property rights have to be protected, and pension funds are one of those types of property. So we think this is a very bad idea. We pushed back against it very hard last year, to such an extent that the Business Day article on the topic today says that the ANC shelved the idea of launching prescribed assets in the face of fierce resistance from civil society. The IRR played a very significant role in that. And ultimately, the now Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, said that prescribed assets were off the table. And we always thought that was temporary. And I think as this initiative from the SACP shows, it does like to make a comeback. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing at the moment. Nicholas.
Yeah, this idea of the sort of guaranteed return is particularly amusing to me because it's sort of like, don't worry, we promise that we'll make ourselves ensure that you get a good return. It's a little bit like someone you're lending money to, promising that, if you lend money to a guy who has, shall we say, a bit of a heroin problem, promising that no, he'll make sure he'll pay you back with interest. It's not our government is not exactly well known for its fiscal discipline. So yeah, I think that should definitely be taken with a grain of salt. But I suppose this maybe the SACP is bringing this up again because they're looking at how much money it's going to take to fix the problems with ESCOM, and they're thinking that this is an easy pot that government should dip its hand into. Do you think that that's the sort of main reasoning behind this one, John?
Let me just find the unmute button. Yeah, I think there's something to that. I also see that we see a question in the chat whether there's been historical precedent for prescribed assets, and indeed there has, because the NP government during time of apartheid also used prescribed assets. So that really shouldn't make it a role model, I think, for the current government, which is proud of its democratic legitimacy. It's a reason to stay away from that proposal rather than approach it.
Exactly. That is a very good point. I see David says, can civil society convince the ANC not to be in government anymore? Just a dream I have. I think that is going to be up to the voters in the end. All right. So one of the other things they called for in this document is a universal basic income grant. Mdluli, you have written a little bit on this topic before. Is it a good idea? Is it something we should adopt?
Definitely not. Firstly, because it is unsustainable, and secondly, it creates a state of dependency. So this country does not need a basic income grant. We need a government that's going to be able to have policies in place that will ensure that companies invest in the country, which will ultimately results in job creation. So we don't need a basic income grant because of those reasons. It is unsustainable, and also it creates a state of dependency.
No, I tend to agree. Although I know that I think the DA actually proposed a basic universal income grant at one point. I'm not sure if that's still in their policy documents. And I don't know, John, what do you make of it? There's an argument to be said that while a new government comes in and is perhaps growing the economy, that this is maybe a temporary thing. But I remember the words of Milton Friedman, there's nothing as permanent as a temporary government program. What do you make of the idea?
I think it's also interesting to think about it in the context of the global discussion on universal basic income or basic income grants. I think often it is contextualized against the idea that automation and robots and artificial intelligence are becoming more and more capable and ultimately rendering many jobs obsolete. And the thinking here, from some of the leading thinkers is that one day there will only be enough work for 10% of the labor force, and 90% will be superfluous effectively. And at that stage, you will need a basic income grant or a universal basic income or something like that to keep people going. I think that's a bit far-fetched. My personal sense is that people will always find a way of generating value for other people in ways that robots and artificial intelligence can't. And that then begs the question of whether instituting something like that won't introduce precisely the kind of dependence that Mlondi was referring to. And I think that risk is real. In South Africa, of course, we already have a very large social grant network or a welfare net, so to speak. It is not universal in the sense that you need to meet certain criteria in order to qualify for the 350 Rand grant or the old age grant or the child grants, etc., etc. But I believe 27 million grants are being paid out in South Africa every month at the moment in a population of about 60 million people, which is pretty damn impressive. And that begs the question of how do you pay for that? Where does the money come from to pay for such a very, very large safety net? If we had a growing economy that was generating huge surplus, it would be easier to justify. But I think in the case of a really struggling economy, that argument is very hard to make. Nicholas?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Okay. Anyway, let's move on from what the SACP is planning. And I'd also like to remind everyone at this point, please, if you enjoyed this content, please like this video, please rate this podcast, please share it with friends and family, put it in that family WhatsApp group to annoy everyone. We'd really appreciate that. Okay, so let's move on to our next topic, and this is the city of Tshwane. And this is not a problem unique to them by any means, but it is still an issue that I think they particularly seem to have focused on. I think also Joburg, to some degree, has done similar things, but Tshwane seems to be the ones who are really pushing it hard and getting in the media about it. And this is, of course, the problem of non-payment of municipal accounts. So Tshwane has actually got a name for their campaign of trying to get people who haven't been paying their electricity and water bills to pay up, and this is the Tshwane Yatima campaign. And they say their focus is now councillors and townships which have outstanding Tshwane municipal debts. There's some stats here that were quoted in the news reporting on this, that, for example, Mlodi and Nelmapius alone have customers which owe the municipality 2.1 billion Rand, which is the most of any area. And there's other areas as well that owe a lot of Rand. I think Soshanguve owes about 1 billion Rand itself. And there are also government departments, interestingly, which have not paid their bills to the city of Tshwane. So like I think recently, I can't remember which department it was. I think it may have been the Department of Health or Home Affairs. It was one of those two where Tshwane showed up to cut the power because they hadn't paid their bills to the city, which I think is pretty embarrassing. Tshwane has also made stress to point out that there is that they are not just focusing on poor areas, which has been the criticism of them, that there is houses in Waterkloof Ridge and other areas of the city where people owing substantial amounts just for residential houses, in one case 500,000 Rand, have been cut off by the city. But I think the larger issue here is about how there's a fundamental breakdown in trust, I think, between South Africans of all classes with the state, right? People think, why should I have to pay when I get terrible services? And the government, for its part, it takes money, but it doesn't give good services, but it can't give good services without money. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle here. So John, how do we get past this problem? I mean, how can a municipal government restore trust?
I was at a public meeting yesterday with representatives from City Power who came to account to residents, and was really quite taken aback at how harsh and vehement the comments were that the city power officials got from residents. But many people were complaining that they had gone through periods of being without power for 6 days, 3 days, of case tickets being closed without the issue being resolved. And I think this is exactly this breakdown of trust. When things don't work properly,
just
people
just
then
as a
question
brief
what they should be doing.
just as a brief aside, I actually, I was a counselor for a bit, so I know a lot about that. But I also have had personal experiences. Just recently, I had a problem where the neutral cable outside my house had been stolen and it was causing various electrical problems. Reported it to the city. Someone was eventually dispatched, and within 1 minute of them arriving at the scene, they closed the case and marked it as complete. So it's certainly not isolated. I'm sure anyone who lives in Joburg listening has the same feeling.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's quite widespread. I think it's also important to point out, that sometimes you do get very good contractors working for City Power, and they do resolve issues, and they work late at night, and they go the extra mile, and that is very much appreciated. But all too often, that is not the experience people have, and that's what makes them angry. I think the way to resolve this issue is, I think that Swan is on the right path here. I remember when I went on a visit to the Mdluli municipality 4 mayors ago, when the DA had recently taken over, I think from the ANC. They said that part of their program had been to boost their revenue collection in order to provide the services and thereby, ratchet up performance, the willingness to pay, and also the services that they were able to deliver. And I think that is what the cities have got to do. So I think Swan is on the right track here. But it's not easy because, as you say, the residents are now at the stage where they say, well, show me the results before I give you my money. And who can blame them for that? But yeah, you got to start somewhere. And ultimately, if you received a service or a good, you should pay for it. And you can't just not pay for it, even if you're a municipality or a councillor or some wealthy dude living in Waterkloof.
I remember in 2016, the DA government in Joburg made quite a big deal out of this, which is that they said, there's a shopping center here or there that owes significant amounts of money, and I think some of that did make its way into the media. So it's not just ordinary people, it's not just poor people, it's basically everyone takes a little bit of a stab at not paying municipal accounts, and sometimes they have, I think, good reasons for it. I know in Joburg, a huge number of people receive bills that have completely the wrong billing information. Famously, there was someone who got a bill for something like R1 billion, and they noticed that their account number and the amount owed was identical. So obviously there'd been a clerical error there. But
before you go, Nicholas, at yesterday's meeting, one person got up and said that their problem was that they had a prepaid meter, but they weren't paying for the electricity. So they were, using free electricity, and they kept on reporting it to City Power. And the entire audience was, sit down, quiet. The person said, no, I've got to pay. I've got to do the right thing. Please help me pay.
And it is upon the backs of citizens like that the future will be built. So God bless them. But all right. Of course, one of the other sides of this is that it's very tempting for political parties to, every government in the country, whether they're opposition or ANC, has this problem of non-payment. And yet it's always tempting for, when you're not in government, to criticize the other side for going after people for not paying their bills. Mlondi, you noticed recently an example of this.
Yes, I saw on Twitter. It was actually between the DA and the Patriotic Alliance, because the Patriotic Alliance was doing this in the Central Karoo, where Gaten McKenzie is the mayor, and the DA was like, "But how can you do this? It's unfair to people that have jobs, because they're going to lose their jobs. It's not fair. Don't do it." But they do it in Swane and in Johannesburg. But so I just find it a bit awkward, and yeah, I was like, no, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's saying, no, it's okay when we do it, guys, but
yeah,
these people are being completely unfair and unreasonable.
Yeah,
yeah, no, the political incentives are not good on this one, because if there's one thing voters hate, it's being told they have to pay more money. So I kind of understand where they're coming from. And of course, the ANC has this problem too of I'm sure they're already writing their press releases criticizing Tshwane for this, but while in government, I have been to numerous government officials giving speeches about how, non-payment is an issue that needs to be corrected. So. Anyway, let's move on to our next topic. And this is about Operation Dudula, the controversial group. Our former colleague, Sihle Ngobese, says that there is a good, a bad, and an ugly side to them. And that's, I think, definitely true. Recently, there have been accusations made by some Somali businessmen in Khayelitsha that they need help from the police because they are being targeted in attacks by people who are claiming to be members of Operation Dudula. One of the victims, a guy called Abidi Molim, said that since Saturday, Somali-owned spaza shops in several local communities in Khayelitsha have been ransacked and robbed of all cash and products, while shopkeepers have been physically assaulted by a volatile group of people. He said, quote, "I don't know why they are doing this. We are struggling and scared while police don't want to help us. Must we die before someone sees that this isn't right and help us? Please help us, my sister." The police said they were in no position to respond to unsubstantiated allegations, and that there had to be a meeting with the station commander between the victims and the police if they wanted some sort of special operation to be carried out. For what it's worth, Operation Dudula's senior leadership structures have distanced themselves from these attacks. They say that they are not involved, and these people claiming to be members of theirs have nothing to do with them. The provincial coordinator for Operation Dudula said, quote, "This is the first time I'm hearing of these claims, and immediately I'd like to denounce them and distance ourselves from them. This is not our doing. We do not carry out illegal activities. However, I will follow up with our national team to investigate the claims. Contrary to what the public thinks, we are not anti-immigrants. In trying to fix the country, we have taken an active stance against illegal immigrants. However, that's not to say we are going about attacking people. These people should be helped. I'll personally reach out to them and see if we can put them in touch with IPID if SAPs won't help." So I think that was a very good comment from Operation Dudula there. But John, this is I think, in many ways, the kind of next looming crisis that the country may be suffering from. I don't think there's a huge amount of opinion polling out there about South Africans' opinions towards foreigners, but all of this evidence I've seen suggests that it tends to be very negative. While we often make the case at the Institute of Race Relations that race relations are much better than is perceived in the media, I think that can't be said for South Africa's relationship to foreigners. I think I saw a poll, it was either a year or two ago, which said that something like a majority of South Africans believe the primary cause of unemployment was in fact foreign nationals. What do you make of this case here, John?
It's almost like one of those cases of somebody not being able to control the demons which they themselves summoned. So Operation Dudula has been summoning the demons of xenophobia. That has, I think, been quite explicit. And whether or not they were involved in this case, I think it ties into their messaging that these kinds of incidents do happen. And so I do think that Operation Dudula and other organizations that promote xenophobia do bear some of the blame, even when they're not directly involved. What these kinds of incidents do highlight, however, is the weakening of property rights and the ability of the state to protect people and their property in South Africa, which is a huge issue. As you mentioned at the beginning, I've just come back from overseas, and one of the really startling impressions that greeted me on my return was just this feeling that property rights are not taken seriously in South Africa. And that is the reason why you see so much neglect and so many things breaking down, not working properly. At our Tambo, the ceiling panels were falling down. You could see that the parking pay stations, 2 out of 3 weren't working. The one that was working was very slow. And throughout the city, you see these signs of neglect, things not being well taken care of, not being maintained well. And I think all of this ties into the same big picture, which is weak property rights. And weak property rights is something that is at the very core of what a state is responsible for, making sure that they are protected, that they can be enforced and asserted in relationship with other people within the state, and that the personal safety of individuals is maintained. And what we're seeing here is that the state is currently not doing that. That is, together with these demons that are being summoned here, I think one of the greatest risks to the future of South Africa is if we don't get the protection of property rights and the personal safety of people back at the top of the agenda and working and being protected properly, then South Africa doesn't have a future. That's how important this is. And this also ties, of course, back to our prescribed assets discussion at the beginning of the conversation. You might think this is completely unrelated, but it's not. You really need the state to be very firm in standing up for property rights, being able to protect them not only through law and through their words, but also through their deeds. When the state cannot do that, you get all sorts of negative consequences. And one of those negative consequences is xenophobia of the kind that is being demonstrated in Khayelitsha most recently. Nicholas?
Yeah, it's very concerning. And I think part of the problem that Operation Dudula has is I think there are some people there who are in that organization who are generally concerned. I mean, the comments from the provincial spokesperson here I thought were pretty responsible. So there's definitely some people who I think are focused on this and using this organization as very much a legal civil society group to raise a serious problem, which is illegal immigration. Unfortunately, there's also 100% an element within Operation Dudula that is very much not on board with the sort of restrained approach here. Mlondi, you personally had a run-in, I believe, with Operation Dudula once. Can you just tell us about that?
Yes, this took place around about April or May when they were launching here in Cape Town. I was leaving a coffee shop with a friend of mine on a Saturday, and they were marching down the streets, and they literally pointed at me and said, "You foreigner, we're coming for a job." And I was just shocked, I was like, "What's happening now? What's happening?" I was just shocked, absolutely shocked, and confused and worried, because
Right,
I'm not sure if John said this. John Endres actually pointed out that if we let this carry on, then it's going to move from foreign nationals to all other black South Africans and then to whites, and then so that actually ring the bell when that actually happened to me. So
that's a really good point, because I mean, for example, Tsonga people in South Africa do actually suffer discrimination quite a lot, partly because they're seen as being essentially Mozambicans, even though Tsonga is an official language of South Africa, and you can very easily see how this whole thing can move on from being about illegal immigrants to being about all immigrants to being about, well, are the vendors really South Africans, or are they just Shaunas in disguise? So, and I think that could have a very nasty spiral effect. John, any brief thoughts on this before we finish up?
Yeah, I think an important thing to keep in mind here is that everybody is part of a minority, and every minority is under threat. That is the problem with these kinds of movements. You might think that being black, you're in the majority in South Africa and you're safe, but you're not really, because even if you're black, you form part of many other groups. Your identity is multi-layered, and in most of those groups, you're going to be part of a minority. You'll be a Cape Townian, or you'll be somebody who went to school at so and so, or you'll be from whatever family it is. And that is exactly the smallest minority is the individual, exactly. And that is why we push back against this kind of thinking. And the important thing is, I think, for people to be treated with dignity on the basis of their humanity, no matter where they come from, what group they form a part of, whether that be a minority or a majority. And I think also very importantly, for the equal citizenship rights of everybody who is a South African citizen to be respected, and for foreigners also to be given an option of obtaining South African citizenship through a clear and unbureaucratic process, which at the moment isn't the case. It's just a nightmare, I think, trying to get South African citizenship. Nicholas?
Indeed it is. So I didn't ask you to clarify on this point, but Mlondi, you are very much a South African born and raised. So
yes. Yes.
Right. So
yes.
it makes you wonder why they threatening you as though you're a Nigerian. Is it just simply because
it's complexion, definitely. It's definitely
right? So it's just sort of that. It's just like straight up racism, which is
yes.
very not good. Anyway, we don't have time for this last story here, but I just suggest that our readers do keep an eye on it, because this could be the next big world hotspot. Of course, we've seen Russia, Ukraine this year, but Israel and the United States have made a joint pledge that they will deny Iran nuclear weapons with force as a last resort. There has been a lot of under the radar back and forth attacks on each other by Iran and Israel. They are very close to a state of open conflict at this point, and this could turn into the next big hotspot. So please do keep your eyes on that in the news if you are worried about things. And of course, that's only going to make, if you think the petrol price is bad now, wait till that happens, where Iran's got like 10% of the world's oil or something. So that would not be very good. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for listening. We hope that you enjoyed the show. Please support the Institute of Race Relations by SMS your name to 32823, and also check out its website irr.org.za for our latest campaigns, which Mlondi is part of the campaigns team there. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful week, and we will see you next week on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers.